What's going on, guys? We're here for the breakdown. I'm with my co-host Shane Isler. We've got a great guest who is my mentor, Lalith Gunaratne, and this is Business Lessons Without the Scar. All right, I think let's get right into it. So Lalith and me, we actually met through one of my other mentors who is going to be following this podcast, Malcolm Sinclair Park, who's also a close friend of mine. He invited me one morning to a breakfast, to a coffee, and I didn't really think much about it. I was really just starting my business journey. I didn't know anything about business or sales or even networking at that point. And so he was one of my mentors. He texted me. I said, okay, well, I have to show up to this. This could be very important. Why is he inviting me? I'm sure there's great purpose to this. And then I met Bernie and Lalith that day, and me and Lalith quickly connected. And I think Lalith could tell that I was really seeking something by the questions I was asking, because I was asking very, very profound questions like, what do you guys think the meaning of life is? What is the meaning of being a man? Are we supposed to have a family? And, I was sitting with three great men. I was thinking, well, I may as well get all the advice I can and just soak it in. And then after that, me and Lalith went on to become very close, meeting for coffee consistently. He introduced me to one of his brilliant sons, who I later ran an AI company with, who's also still a very close friend of mine, and we work on a lot of projects together. So yeah, Lalith, I guess you can kind of talk about what did you feel when you first met me, and what was that like when we first met at coffee? What did you think?
Thank you, Shane and Jordan. Thank you for the introduction, Jordan. It's a pleasure to be here. I love hanging out with the younger generation because it gives me hope and trust that the world's going to be okay in your hands.
That's good to hear.
Yeah. Jordan, I mean, as you said, I like somebody who looks at the existential questions of life too, because life has become so superficial for all of us because of social media and the small memes, the short memes, and the short attention span, that we really never learn anything when we don't pay attention for long enough with anything, right? So that's why I enjoyed the questions you asked, and I thought, okay, that's different. How old were you? Like 23 or something at the time? Yeah. So I went back home and told my wife Samantha, and I told Rahel was at home. I said, I met this young guy who was quite interesting. He asked me all these questions. So that's how it kicked off. So it's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah. So I guess right away, I just wanted to kind of quickly get into, I don't want to go into your whole background because I know we could talk for hours, but I just kind of want to get into a bit of the solar panel company and how you kind of became an entrepreneur. How did you step into that world? I know you said you had mentors early on who really helped and guided you. You had some close friends and I think cousins that were your business partners. So how did you get into the whole solar panel venture? And, how did you end up later in Canada from that project as well?
Well, I grew up in Sri Lanka. I was born there and came here as a kid, as a 14-year-old. And so that opened up my world to a new reality in the West. But I also brought with me some Eastern philosophies and principles, and my mindfulness practice comes from there. So I've always been curious and open, and I'm a free spirit. So I knew that I could never work for anybody from the start. It's sort of growing up with a Montessori school teacher who gave me those principles. So that's how kind of my mentality was always to explore new things. So my cousin and I, after we both graduated from Toronto, we did a trip across Asia, rather through Europe, in a Volkswagen Pop Top, exploring and partying our way through in 1984, following a path of a book called The Drifters. Ended up back in Sri Lanka where we were born. One thing led to another, and we were open-minded. An idea of a solar power business came up, and that's how we got into the solar energy business. Apparently, it was a pioneering business. We were the first to do this kind of business using a technology that was already there to sell solar home systems to rural people who didn't have access to the grid. So I would say that was my biggest education. After I look at all my life as a learning journey, but this experience, which was a focused, targeted journey where we raised money, built a business from scratch, and ended up selling the company to a global company like Shell at the end of 11 years. was an incredible 11-year learning journey. And as I said, yes, part of that life was also to have mentors. And I was 26 years old actually 25 when we embarked on the idea. And by the time we started the business, we were 27. So that's why I love the fact that you are entrepreneurs at your age and thinking in that.
Seeking it,
thinking, finding ways. And one of the things that I always believe in is when your mind and heart is open, the universe answers with certain things. It just shows up, right?
Yeah.
So I've lived my life all along like this. I've had successes. I've had many failures, many more failures and successes. And being an entrepreneur needs a certain amount of courage too, and a fearlessness that when the chips are down, you need to still get up in the morning and show up. And that's what I luckily have been able to do. I have had a practice where I manage my mind and body in a certain way. I exercise and I breathe well and meditate every morning as a practice, which is what keeps me grounded. And that's what I advocate for everybody who's starting business, because the world out there is messy. The world is difficult. It's getting more and more competitive, more and more difficult, faster and faster. Technology is changing, and everything is uncertain and impermanent and ambiguous and volatile. So in that kind of world, starting a new business can be really challenging and risky. So what I advocate is that foundational basic practice of being grounded, and then taking things one day at a time from there.
Interesting. There was one story I quickly wanted you to summarize again, because it's one of my favorite stories you've ever told me, which is when you had worked in a very, very rural area with a family setting up, I think their solar panels, and you caught them in your vehicle and you were nervous that they were potentially taking something from you. So I'll let you finish that story, but that story was fascinating to me because it's very perspective-based story, and I think you learned something from that, and I also now learned from that story as well.
Sure, thank you, Jordan. Actually, even though I grew up in Sri Lanka, I grew up in upper middle class, anglicized home. So our mindset was very Western-oriented, transactional, competitive, get out there and study and make something of yourself. But there's another world in Sri Lanka that's open-minded, open-hearted, hospitality. You give whatever you have to help somebody else, even if you don't have much. So I hadn't really experienced that world too much in growing up in an English-oriented, Anglo-oriented. I went to a Catholic school in an urban area kind of thing. But just 100 miles away were these rural areas still living like they lived 1,000 years ago. So those were our customers, and I hadn't really encountered them before. So the first time we went to one of these homes where we had installed solar lighting systems, and these people normally use kerosene lamps. And then as I came, because they are hospitable people, they were thrilled that one of the owners of the business showed up at their house. I came to see how the system was working and to get some market intelligence from them and all of that too, feedback. And they were treating me like a guest and serving me food, having conversations with me, and I was really thrilled at their hospitality, their open-heartedness, their gratitude for bringing light to their home. But from the corner of my eye, I saw two of the sons, the young men, opening the tailgate of my station wagon, and I immediately went into this mindset of, what are they doing opening my car? Because that's that mindset, right? It's my property, you're violating my property, and that's the mindset that I had, right? So then I got agitated immediately, and I wanted to end the conversation and go and see what was taken from my car, because I had my bag, I had some solar panels back there. So I walked away saying their buys and walked in haste to my car to see whether there was anything missing. But I saw instead a big bag of rice. For that, I just couldn't believe my eyes. I felt guilty. I felt upset that I even suspected something. I felt so low and down, and I didn't know what to do. My immediate reaction was, as they were walking with me towards the car, I pulled it out, and I was pulling the rice bag out. Luckily for me, the person who was our local agent, who was a person again from a village, told me, put it back. What are you doing? you're upsetting the people. And I saw their faces fall. I still didn't get it. For me, I was thinking, this is a transaction. They paid me money for this. Why should they give me a gift for this? I just couldn't get my head around that. So that generosity and gratitude and graciousness is what came out of that encounter. When I put it back and I said to them, I said, look, you don't have to give me these gifts because you paid good money for it. I came to see this for a business purpose, really. But what it turned out to be was more than business. It's about relationships. It's about trust that we create with each other. It's a communion between people. That's what I started learning through this business, which is really missing from our modern world, because everything is a transaction now. It's a left hemispheric, left brain transaction. I'm going to give you something. What can I get something back from you? And we need to get back to that. I'm going to help you without expecting anything back. And that's the way I've lived my life.
Yeah.
And I feel happy about that life that I've led. I'm 65 years old, and when I look back, I'm not wealthy by any standard, but I'm wealthy in the relationships I have around the world, the friendships I have around the world, as a result of that open-hearted attitude I've tried my best to live by. So that's a lesson that I like to teach young people, because, and I've had many, many stories like that I can relate to, even with another story with my father, that if I can relate one more story that you haven't heard, Jordan.
Yeah.
I was about 9 years old, living in a suburb of the area called Kandy in Sri Lanka. It's really a village. There was one grocery store. It was called a boutique, basically. They sold rice and
Kandy
bread.
is one of the biggest cities in Sri Lanka, correct?
Kandy is a hill town, actually.
Okay.
It's a fairly large town.
Okay.
But a beautiful, idyllic hill town. So my father, actually, I got 2 rupees to go and buy some bread.
Yeah.
So I go to the store, I buy the bread, and the owner of the shop gives me way more change than the 2 rupees that I paid him. And for me, as a 9-year-old, I thought, oh, well, I got something over this guy. I got the money, put it in my pocket, and I got the piece, but the bread, and I was kind of hopping, saying, I really now got one over him. I want something. I made more money than I gave, and I'm just hopping along, go back home, and I tell my father proudly, guess what, Dad, I gave 2 rupees, and he gave me 2 rupees back. He looked at it, he counted, and he goes, go back. Give that money back to him. I was so angry with my father. He said, what's wrong with you? That man is a rich businessman. He gave me some extra money. I should keep this. And buy some marbles. And I used to play with marbles and, compete with kids around with this. And anyway, I went back feeling dejected, kicking stones along the way. Go back to the shop owner and say to him, sir, you've given me more money than I paid you for. He goes, oh my gosh, give me that. Okay, oh, right. Wow, thank you for being honest. And I'm thinking, okay, this is... And he opens a couple of jars of toffee and sweets and marbles. He said, take some. So I just took one. He goes, no, take more. I'm thinking, wow, this is amazing. So I'm putting my hand into the jar, and I take a handful of... Take some sweets too. I took the sweets. Take some marbles. I took the marbles. I took a couple of them. He goes, no, take more. I'm thinking, wow, this is amazing. So I put them in my pocket. For me, that was the most amazing lesson in my life about honesty and integrity. Because after that, every time I went to the store, he would open the jars and say, take a few, right? So that's where integrity and honesty has dividends. And I have had that experience over and over again. But you know what? In a competitive world, we get scared to do that. We get scared to open our hearts out and to be honest. And we are constantly out there trying to rip somebody off and take something else from somebody else because of the notion of scarcity. We're all scared that I won't have enough money for tomorrow. So you know what? I'm going to take whatever I can today because I think that I cannot survive for tomorrow. And that's the worst thing to do, because then you're living with that fear.
Yes.
And it's a huge burden to live with that fear.
Business is a very war-style mentality where it's a dog-eat-dog world. You either eat the other business or you don't, and you lose. And so I think a lot of entrepreneurs are also very afraid to be generous, because if you're a bit too generous, well, then the next business is eating you, or they're going to beat you. Yeah, exactly. And so it's definitely a fear of a lot of entrepreneurs. It's how generous do I be, or how forgiving, how nice, because the nicest guys, quote unquote, don't do well in business. It's the dogs, it's the sharks, it's the And so I definitely think that's a very good lesson, is what dividends you can get from being honest and having integrity. It's a different type of repayment that they're going to see last longer and give you more, rather than being greedy and kind of self-gratification and wanting the quick transaction. So
would you by chance be able to give you said this has happened multiple times and shown up in the course of your life. Can you give a more modern example in terms of business, in terms of where within your business dealings a similar sort of scenario took place, or this trait that you had carried forward to benefit you in a much greater way than if you would have, say, ripped someone off?
Absolutely. See, I'm also a coach and a mentor. I act as a friend to business owners and CEOs. And I call it a trusted friend because it's lonely at the top. And every so often I get a call from a good friend saying, hey, Lalith, I got a good friend of mine. He's a big business person, and he's in a bit of trouble. He's having some issues, some stress right now because of the business world is not conducive, and that is impacting not only his health and well-being, his family life and everything else. Would you mind talking to him? And you can charge him some money, right? So I approached that with an open mind. It came from a very close friend, a trusted friend, who I also can depend on, right? Yes. So it's a two-way thing too, right? So then when he sends me his good friend with that kind of a story, am I going to charge him $200 an hour for 8 sessions or whatever that I'm going to? I don't know how long it'll take to help this person to get grounded again. So I start with a conversation and I help them along little by little for them to get their grounding back. And at the end of it, many times they say, hey man, look, I've taken lots of your time. This is your business. How much do I owe you? Can you send me an invoice? And I say to them, hey, it's cool. For me, the gift that I got from you was the fact that you're now back on your feet and you're back in business. And I have other ventures, other businesses that I'm involved in. I'm involved in facilitating investments. I help raise money for businesses. So somewhere down the road, I'm not doing it with that specific purpose. But I know if I say, and I told them too, look, if you need to raise any capital, you can come to me too. I can probably help you out. But there are some terms and conditions that you got to meet, and that's going to be a different transaction. But I've created a level of trust with this person now that he or they know that they can trust me. If I say, look, I can help you, I can try my best. There's no sort of perfect. I may fail in trying to raise money for this person, but thing is, they will know that I will do my best, utmost best, with integrity and being honest to try to help him out, right? So that's the approach that I have, and it has happened like that too. Then they, 6 months later, they come back and say, look, I've got something for you. Can we work on this together? So it just, and there's no grand plan behind it, but it just happens because it's you're building goodwill around those lines. There's another Canadian business person who's not really well known. I wish that there was more about him. His name is Joe Siegel. Yeah. Joe Siegel's family immigrated from the Ukraine back in the early 1900s to the west of Canada, and he grew up in a rural area. So I think, if I'm not mistaken, either Saskatchewan or Alberta, right? And Joe was different. He wanted to do something different. He was always business oriented. So he started buying used clothes, or rather surplus from the arms services shops, and then sort of started selling when he was 18, 19 years old in his area, in his village, and slowly started building a business for himself. He ended up starting a little a clothing store, and then ended up being a supermarket and a department store. And he ended up buying Hudson's Bay and moving to Vancouver. And then in Vancouver, he ended up buying tons of real estate. And his deal was, he always said, when I negotiate with somebody, I negotiate hard. I fight hard. I beat them down. However, when I walk away from the deal, if that person was a good person and I have really got a valuable deal, I'll leave a dime behind. When he says, when I leave a dime behind, if I negotiated hard, I'll leave even 5% sometimes back and say, look, I think you deserve a little bit more, and I'm going to leave that for you to enjoy. And he was also one of the biggest philanthropists in Vancouver. He and his wife used to gather business people from all around Vancouver to raise money for good causes, and he died a happy man. For me, that was one of the most incredible stories that I read. There's a small book about that, where the book was full of feedback, stories written about him by his banker, by his other business colleagues, and everybody talked about his generosity as a businessman. But he was strategic, he was smart, he picked the right deals, he made money on all those things, but he gave just as well as he made. And there's a Joe Siegel auditorium in Vancouver, I think in the Simon Fraser University too. So these are real life stories that I'm talking about. So one has to be fearless. If you're going into something scared and thinking, okay, I got to watch out for everybody else, and yes, you do. You have to be smart, and you have to be focused and strategic at your business in terms of setting it up in a way where you set it up for success. So you have to be strategic on the left-hand side of the brain. So that's where the STEM education comes in, right? Science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. The mindset has to come in to be able to analyze things, think critically, and focus, and listen to others, listen to mentors, and set that business up in a way it's going to succeed. But the soft skills on the other side are the most important on the other side, which is about leadership, good leadership, how you inspire others to action, to follow you, to help you through this business, because you're going to need, no matter how strong your business case is, how good a product you have, you need then a community of supporters to work with you, because you can never succeed on your own in a community.
I love that. That's really interesting. And I had another question I was going to ask, but what you said at the end prompted something different. Where is your belief around mentorship? I know it's something you've been a part of. Yeah. You've been a coach. You've experienced it yourself from the sounds of it. I'd love you to speak maybe to some of the lessons that have come out of mentorship and where your philosophy is in general on why something like that is important.
Absolutely. Now, when we got into business again as 20-something-year-olds, we really didn't know much about management. I had studied organizational leadership, organizational management as a night school course because I was interested in the business part as I was doing my engineering technology program. So, but you never really understand it because that's theoretical learnings that I've had about leadership and managing.
Yes.
There was a chairperson of a big, huge Sri Lankan company called the Haley's Group. And through a friend, he got my two partners and myself into a conversation one afternoon. And when we walked into his office, I noticed that his desk was like this, empty. But he was a chairperson of a company which had over 100,000 people. Companies in Holland and another subsidiary in Australia, and he was based in Sri Lanka. His name is Lal Jayasundara. So I remember as we walked in, he was like an icon in business. I thought, wow, what a privilege to hang out with this guy. And he took us to his lounge and ordered tea for us and started talking. And one of the things that came out, and I said to him, I said, Mr. J, when we walked in, we noticed that your table is empty, with a telephone.
Why?
But you're running a business. Now I'm thinking that when you run a business, you should have a table full of files and papers. He said, boys, I'm going to teach you a lesson about leading and managing, right? He said, there's a difference between leading and managing. Managing, and if you're a manager, if you're a leader, there's a percentage of managing and a percentage of leadership that you need to do. So that percentage depends on the level that you're at. If you're a supervisor of say, a factory, you need to do way more managing than leading, but you still need to do some leading because so the managing is all about then things that you manage that can be measured and counted. So you're managing your resources, you're managing budgets, you're managing your production, you're managing the quality, all of that. So all of that, most of that can be measured, right? And so there's a distinct difference between that and leadership. So managing then requires a certain set of skills that's more left brain, more analytical, more critical thinking, getting things done, but it is also using a certain amount of power that comes from our position, right? If I am a supervisor, that position gives me a certain amount of responsibilities and authority to get things done. I can even punish people. I can threaten people from that position. But he said leadership is about using your power from your personal power side. So that's your integrity. That's your value system. You know, about the way you respect people, the way you listen to people, the way you recognize people, the way you honor people, how the relationship works. So the leadership part of the whole area then depends on the position you are in. So he said, I'm the chairperson of this company. I lead 99.9%. I manage 0.1%. He said, every day at the end of the day, those days it was fax machines, I get a fax from each of my CEOs, and I have certain matrices, certain ratios that are there. If I see something untoward, I give them a call and I have a chat with them. But at the same time, I'm available for them virtually 24 hours a day. If they want to talk to me, get my advice, need any help from me, I'm there for them. So my role is to support them, provide all the resources they need, provide a vision for them to go after. And then also my role is also to look at all the businesses that we have vis-a-vis what's happening in the geopolitical stage, what's happening in the governments, the politics, what's happening in the economic environment, what's happening in the banking environment, the financial environment. For me, to see whether, if I am the captain of the Titanic, to look out for those icebergs that are out there and make sure that I'm not going to hit an iceberg in the future. So my role is not getting bogged down in the day-to-day stuff. My role is to be a future thinker, to look at what's going on and to then take evasive action, do things that strategically I can change course, change policies of the organization, hire new people, go after new businesses now if there are new opportunities opening up. So those are the kinds of things that I'm supposed to do as a visionary. But another more important part is also to keep my people inspired. And when we walked through his company, the head office, he knew the first names of the gardener. He knew the first names of the janitors. He would say, I was shocked. He'd say, oh, how are you? How is your son doing? And I'm thinking, wow, he knows this guy's name. And those people feel so honored they do anything for him, right? So you have that way of inspiring somebody to follow your mission.
Correct.
When you have the relationship part of it too. So leadership has two sides to that coin. It is a skill and there are leadership qualities. And the leadership qualities is about how you use your power in doing that. So you can be a great manager, but you may not be a good leader. So often many organizations give people positions of management without them having emotional intelligence skills. They're a good engineer, but because they're a good engineer, they're senior, they get put into a position of leadership. And they say, I'm not engineering anymore. I got to manage people's emotions now.
Completely
I'm not
different.
good at this. And you see many organizations falling apart as a result of this. So leadership is something that is a constant learning process. It's about learning yourself, learning about yourself, your pain points, what gets you going, what are your fears and hopes, constant learning of yourself, because it's a whole different hat that you got to put on from your management hat.
A lot of people, especially nowadays, young people think, okay, well, I'm going to find 99.9% of my mentors online because there's so much great business knowledge and access to people like Alex Hermosi, Ty Lopez, Grant Cardone, Andrew Tate. Everyone takes from their own mentors online. But what I want to ask is there a balance, and what is the correct balance of learning from mentors online who might be multimillionaires, who might be great business people, and what's the other side of the coin of, oh, actually I need real life mentors? And obviously my personal best advice to find a mentor would be go to events. Even though some of my first mentors, I was lucky enough to stumble upon them, that wasn't at events. But in your opinion, what's the best advice for someone to find a mentor, and what is the balance that they should have between online mentors and real life mentors?
I think it's thank you, good question, Jordan. I think it's it's a personal choice for us.
Okay.
There are great online mentors. Yesterday, I listened to a talk between Trevor Noah and Simon Sinek on relationships and friendships.
Yeah.
It was an amazing conversation. I just happened on it and I listened to it, and I really got something from that, right? But one of the things that I also do is some of these conversations and podcasts may last an hour, but you get the gist of it fairly fast, right? Then you understand, then you know it's going to be a repeat of things, and you kind of have to be efficient with your time, right? But some of the talks, when you go to the end, the real nuggets come at the end too.
Yes,
so you got to make a judgment, right? So you got to have time. So I say, yes, we have in the modern generation the ability to access all of these people from around the world.
Mentors. Yeah.
And that's a great resource to have. But there's nothing like eyeball to eyeball, face to face, because then you understand. You can have feedback both ways. I can read your body language and see where you're at. I can understand where your pain points are through the conversations that I'm going to have. You can understand what my pain points are. And also, I would say, as a mentor, it's not a one-way relationship. I learn from you as much as you may learn from me. It's a two-way process. And that's the way that we can really build some integrity in that relationship, and to take it from there. So that's, I would say it's also very personal.
I guess another way you can agree or disagree to find a really good mentor is to value yourself a lot, because then a mentor wants to have an apprentice that values themselves so much that they actually get excited to be around this apprentice. And whenever I was around you and Malcolm, I always thought to myself, wow, they always tell me how much value I'm bringing them. That actually makes my confidence greater, and it actually makes our relationship stronger, because then I realized, wow, this is a two-way street. We're both getting so much value out of this. And I think if you just tell yourself, oh, my mentor is just, he's giving me all the value and I'm not giving anything back, my perspective means nothing, well, then it's going to be less likely that they're going to want to be around you long term, because you should look at yourself as, oh, no, I'm bringing a certain level of value as well.
Yes. No, absolutely. It's a two-way.
I want to add something to that. So one of the biggest things I think that I've done for myself in the last year was start working with a personal trainer. Yeah. And so, I mean, I grew up an athlete. I was a competitive swimmer. I always had an intimate relationship with sports. Yeah. But I had never really had that consistent, direct, specific encouragement and feedback that came from having a mentor. Yeah. So different. Fitness is one of the industries where you could go online and you could never possibly in your entire lifetime watch all of the content on fitness. Yeah. Yeah. And most of it probably isn't that relevant. A lot of it's conflicting, right? And everyone thinks they may know what's best for you, but the best way to get feedback, I think, is when you have that personalization. And so taking this outside of fitness, looking at mentorship in business, I think it's so great to sit down with someone like yourself and some of the mentors that I have, because they've been able to not just see the tacticalities to what's happening, but also the feelings, right? And I may be saying one thing, but I may be saying that because I heard it somewhere and I feel like that's my belief, but it's really not. And deep down, I want something different. And you as a mentor, you can sense that because you've got this scar before. You've been through this lesson probably more than once. And it said that, you get slapped across the face a couple times, you start to learn how to dodge. Yeah. So I wanted to just add that to context here. And this brings me to a different point. I know we've only got you for a finite amount of time here. And something that I feel like a lot of people don't always love to talk about, and something that I, by contrast, love to poke at, is failure. Yeah. And so one of the things that I wanted to take the time to ask you is some of the failures that you've had and some of the lessons that you've learned from them. I think there's always a couple major, like, oh shoot, I messed up moments where it almost feels world shattering. And I'm curious what some of those have been for you and what the lessons that you took from those were.
I would say coming to Canada in 2011, with a family with 4 kids and starting life here again at the age of 52, I was invited to join a solar energy business here, which really had so much promise. And this company was run by 2 very experienced solar entrepreneurs who we bought a factory from these guys way back in the 80s. So I was really chuffed that when I came to decide to move to Ottawa, they invited me to take a stake in the business. And the business was depended on a government program called Ontario OPA, Power Authority, buying solar electricity back to the grid.
Yeah.
But politics got in the way of this whole program and it got messed up. So I had put money into this without thinking about all of this, and I was naive to think that even in Canada, politics don't get played out. There's lots of politics in Sri Lanka that influence these things. And I got blindsided. I lost my money, lost the whole opportunity, and it was August when I came, invested in the company around September, and then we were waiting for the OPA to make the announcement for us to move to the next step, because we had won a first step of a bunch of contracts now. And these are rooftop solar systems that we would own and sell back the electricity to the government, to Ontario Hydro, essentially. And nothing was happening. October election cycle started, and they started attacking the whole program. And then I was thinking that, have I made a mistake?
Oof.
And I put my money into it. I rented a house, bought a car, and paying our kids' first year's university fees and all of that. And I had forgotten what October was like, because I was away for 27 years when I left in 1984. When the days get shorter and darker, and now I don't see a future. I feel that I'm going to hit a wall, and you can go into a really, really bad, difficult place. And then the only thing that kept me going was I would still meditate. I would still do my push-ups and sit-ups, and I started running out into the cold, just not allowing this to get a hold of me. It would get a hold of me, but I would fight it. I would fight it because. And another thing was, I didn't tell Samantha, my wife, because her mother was coming for Christmas, and if I tell her now, she'd get scared and she'd stop everything. And our money was dwindling, the money that we brought. So to really deal with that by myself was the toughest part, because I didn't have friends either, or mentors here, except for one friend who was here, who I was able to have some conversations with, right? So the only way I know that I survived that mentally and physically was my exercise routine and my meditation practice, because I came away renewed, because there's a physical response to, when you go for a run and come back, there's an endorphin hit that renews opens up your mind. You also get your digestive system going, so your serotonin is there, your dopamine is working. So all of those things gives you a little bit of space to think a little differently. So one of the other things I started doing was I started going to networking events, even to events that were outside my area of expertise. So I went to development networking, with people from CEDA, Canadian International Development Corporation. At that time it was, now it's Foreign Affairs. Those kinds of sessions, and started meeting people, because I did do some consulting work in that area when I was doing rural energy stuff. So I had some relevance to them. I started making friends, and then I told myself, I'm going to make a new friend every day. I'm going to meet somebody for a conversation every day, a meaningful conversation every day. And I set that as a goal. From about January that year, I started meeting somebody new. As my money was dwindling, and another thing I started doing was to make sure to pay for the coffee myself. Even though I was in a scary place of money dwindling, I would make that for this meeting. And like that, I started building a network in Ottawa from all walks of life. Different places, diversity of people. Slowly I started getting, and I got an invitation to run a training program for the federal government through one of these contacts called Savera Hyatt. She called me one day and said, "Hey Lalith, are you there to step in and run a dealing with conflict program for federal government staff?"
Is that when Sage Ontario was born?
Yeah, okay. virtually. And I wasn't going to do that. I had run Sage for 10 years in Sri Lanka with my business partner, Robert Vanderwall, who, based in Australia. That's his company name, Sage Training.
Okay.
So I set that up because I had no choice. I had to now build other avenues of income, right? My financial issues still haven't gone away. And luckily I had friends and well-wishers and family members who were able to contribute to this difficult time. And that has given me the space and time to get involved in a host of other businesses, to be able to now pay all that monies back. So I still face some of that, I would say, the pressure to earn some good money. And I get all kinds of opportunities to make good money. But I will never cross the line of ethics and values, because there are opportunities where I can tell people, take them down the garden path and make some money out of it. No, I will never do that, because I know, because there's a karmic effect that is there that'll bite you back at some point when you do something like that. So I walk away from things where I know that my integrity is going to be at stake. So just to I gave a kind of a long-winded answer to that question, but I'm still suffering from the after effects of that loss of that business, that failure.
Humbling experience, I'm sure. Yeah.
Absolutely.
And do you find that gives you motivation now, or how do you perceive what happened at this stage in life?
Well, it was nobody's fault really, except for the political system, and then when people play political games. So it was not my partner's fault. They themselves lost too, right? We all lost together. So it was one of those things that was very hard for us to predict, and it blindsided us completely. And it's like many other things in the world of business out there. Things blindside us from nowhere. We have no idea it comes. But it's about the resilience of being able to pick ourselves up and move forward, right? So how do we do that? So that's where the mind-body comes in. And as I said earlier, it's a messy world out there. Nothing is predictable. Everything is complicated and complex out there, because we're dealing with a multiplicity of issues that are beyond our control, from the politics to geopolitics to technology changes, now climate change, economics to social issues. All of those things are even more heightened now because of social media and the cancel culture and the woke stuff that's going on, where people are just not able to deal with conflict, deal with views that are outside their own viewpoint. They become uncomfortable and scared, and then it start attacking people. It's really a sad world when you think about it right now that we have created. So for me, this practice keeps me from being victimized by these things. Right. And as young entrepreneurs, especially the younger generation, and I know the younger generation, your generation, I think, is now more resilient. There was a generation who, I think there was a kind of a self-esteem, sort of a, how can I say, focus of a generation where parents and teachers and the education system didn't hold people accountable. They allowed them, even though they were mediocre, told them they were good, and we will pass the exam.
Medals. Yes,
exactly. Exactly. And that was not good. Like I came from a world where I went to a Catholic school where there were priests who walked around with a cane, and I don't advocate
of course,
corporal punishment, but at the same time, it hasn't scarred me, because I knew where that discipline, where that Father Aiden De Silva was the rector of our school called St. Anthony's College. He picked up that cane for a good reason. Right? And I didn't walk away feeling bitter or victimized by that. Right?
Interesting. It's all perspective.
Exactly. But there are other teachers and other people who will pick up a cane for no good reason, and that's where it crosses the line. But I don't condone violence in any way. And I've been in violence. I come from a world of martial arts, and I've been subjected to violence, and I've fought in my life, and that's another different experience too. Because when you get punched, you have a different reality. And when you give a good punch to, there's another different reality, right? So I've done it in competition. I've done it on the street. So it's given me an education. I don't advocate it. But the thing is, there have been some occasion where you had to defend yourself, right? So it's a very complex world out there that we have to deal with.
So we have to wrap up here. We really appreciate your time, though, Lalith. Did you have any final questions? I just have one last question I'm going to ask Lalith before we head out. Did you have any final one that you want to quickly get out of him?
I do.
Okay, go. And I'm going to ask a quick question, then we're going to wrap up. Yeah.
So This has been so awesome. I wish that we had 4 hours.
Trust me. Lalith can talk, and it's fascinating every time.
We'll definitely have to connect after this. Because there's a lot more I wanted to talk to you about, and I wrote a bunch of stuff down. But
sure.
Something that I really love to ask is, what's something you wish more people asked you about?
Wow, that's a great question.
That is a good question.
I've got lots of those.
How do I live life large? How can I make the maximum out of the abundance that the universe has to offer, right? How can I move away from the scarcity mentality that the world has conditioned me to live in fear? How can I live fearlessly?
That was a great answer.
Yeah, phenomenal answer. As always, he always pulls a crazy answer out of, and it's perfect. He always makes me laugh. The one thing I wanted to get, which you can sort of direct to the young demographic of hungry entrepreneurs, or who just want to grow on their mental health, who are seeking something same thing that I was seeking the first time I met you. I'm still learning. I'm still on a journey, but I feel like I've at least, I've got a few stepping stones together now. I think I want to address the people who don't have a stepping stone, who are maybe depressed, who don't have a direction. And also I want you to speak to your younger self. So if you had just a few pieces of advice that you can put in just a couple sentences, what should that person seek? And what would you tell your younger self if you had all this knowledge that you have right now? What would be a few key things that you would say? Focus on this or look into this. I know one big thing for me that a close friend and mentor, he was actually just my neighbor, but he told me to study geopolitics, and that ever affected my life for the better. And then we've gotten into a bunch of conversations about geopolitics. So maybe something that they can look into, they should study, or just some advice that, to guide some young people who maybe don't know what they want or what they're seeking currently.
Wow, that's a big question.
It is a big question. Yeah.
We got to get together again to address.
Definitely. We'll have you on again.
I would say one thing is learn the foundational stuff of all these important topics out there. Learn psychology. Take a couple of psychology courses. Listen to psychology podcasts. Read some psychology books.
Yeah.
From way back when people like William James and philosophers like William James go back even further to how the Western civilization was formed based on Descartes, the French philosopher's principle of I think, therefore I am, separating the mind and the body, and see how that has served us fairly well, but now it's biting us back because we have separated the mind and the body. So I would say go back to those kinds of first principles, understand how the civilization was formed, understand how the age of Renaissance was formed before in the 1700s, which created the world that we live in right now.
Correct.
Read Adam Smith's books. You don't have to read the whole book, but there are summaries about the economic theories that has created the current world that is there, which is based on GDP growth at any cost. So you add the GDP, gross domestic product of a nation or a region or whatever it is, based on whether it's good or bad. As long as it generates money, it adds, which is not a good thing. We need to be able to separate the good and the bad, right? And I would say learn the foundations of mathematics, learn the foundations of the accounting principles. For me, I'm not a numbers person, but I force myself to learn how to read a balance sheet. So I can understand some of the basic foundational things, the double-sided accounting principles, just to get your head around that. So like that, I'd say, you might have the greatest idea, you might be the greatest coder, but you got to learn all of these other things.
Don't be afraid to go back to the basics.
Exactly. And the very foundational stuff that you got to learn.
Correct.
So that's the way, just like what you said about going back to your mentor, you probably started working out and lifting weights and swimming, all of that. But when you talk to an expert, they'll give you some finer things that you need to perhaps even change some of the basic things that you did, even from lifting weights or whatever it is.
He's readjusting your base platform, and he's reconstructing it.
Exactly.
So you're more firm on the top when you're actually making your way there.
Exactly. And that's what I would say.
Well, thank you so much. This has been amazing.
Yeah. If I can wrap up and say one thing, we're incredibly grateful to have had you on the podcast.
Yes.
And I'm sure someone that we will likely have as a guest again.
100%.
And again, this goes back to what the podcast is all about. And it's business lessons without the scar. and there's no one that gets to where you are in life without a few scars. And I appreciate you giving the chance to have a bit of a glimpse into your world and share what that looked like. So thank you so much for your time, and I can't wait for the next one.
Thank you, Shane and Jordan.
Yes.
I'm really chuffed with this, and all the very best to you all in putting these messages out there to help all these young people, entrepreneurs.
I love it.
Yes, boom, boom. Yeah.
All right.
Oh.
Cut.
Well, let's get together for a coffee, right?
Yes, yes.
And